The Buzzworthy Origins subline was one that I missed out on that I wasn't really too fussed about. At the time when Bumblebee and Jazz released, I wasn't a massive fan of the way they looked. They were too kibbly for my liking. I had a slightly different view on my figures at that point. I like things to be clean, I wasn't overly fussed about gimmicks. Engineering and posing just weren't quite as high a priority, so I didn't even consider buying them until I made the fatal mistake of handling an Origins Bumblebee at TF Nation, and I was instantly smitten by it. It felt really solid, it posed amazingly, the transformation was pretty fun, and I just really found it satisfying in hand, and not long after that, Origins Wheeljack had its street date, but I still passed on it. And I sat on it, and I contemplated buying it, and I kept passing it up until eventually Chambalism got it for me for Christmas. They're a real one, go check them out. And now that I have it in hand, Legacy United Origin Wheeljack is actually a really fun figure. But is it perfect? Well, if I said that now, what's the point in watching the rest of the video? The sculpted detail and proportions on this figure are mostly really good. There are a few details that are a little soft, particularly on things like the shoulders and the thighs, but the vast majority of the sculpt is pretty clean. The main thing that I find with this guy is that apart from the torso area, this guy doesn't really look too much like Wheeljack to me. Like, I understand some of the design is very compromised so they could get the alt mode out of this guy, which is impressive, but the arms and legs just don't give me a Wheeljack vibe. He seems very short and stocky and broad. I always see the Wheeljack as a little bit more of a lanky character, and also the figure is missing some crucial details like on the shins and the feet. Where's the bits of the livery? Oh well, I guess you can look past that because apart from the limbs being a little bit too wide and generic, the actual torso block is probably the best Wheeljack has ever looked at mainline. Something about the positioning of the window chest and the way that it tapers in, the size and shapes on the roof, the slight indentations where all the colours very neatly sit, the shoulder wings which Earthrise has absolutely nothing on, and then this head. Now, this is something special. Do I think this head looks better than the Earthrise version, or at least the Gen Selects one? No, no way in hell. These are basically equal in my books. But I think the proportional changes to this head make it suit the body a lot better than the Earthrise head suited that body. You know, the mouth plate's a little broader, the antennas at the side are a little smaller and have more of an interesting angle to them. I do think the eyes are inset a little too far, you can't really see them very clearly, and I do prefer the brighter colours that you get on the Gen Selects version for that. But this is a very good head that works very well with this body. But if we're talking about this mold, I can't fail to mention that there is a lot of kibble. Now, this is a pretty inevitable side effect of this design. If they're trying to get that alt mode out of this look, they're not going to do it without some compromise. But those shins are absolutely colossal, and that backpack is enormous. Now, thankfully, the backpack is pretty thin and hollow, so it doesn't cause too many stability issues with the figure. It just impacts the posing a little, which we will get to later. But aside from it impacting the look a little, it's not the worst backpack in the world. I'm never going to stop dragging DCS Megatron through the mud, am I? But the thing that bothers me a little bit more about this guy are the shins. Now, for a gimmick that I will eventually talk about when I cover Origins Bumblebee, don't worry, I've got a pre-order down, but it's coming 6 weeks after I record this. The rear end of the vehicle mode has to be very hollow, so a lot of the panels from it are localized to the shins, leaving them very thick. My brain doesn't particularly like that the sides don't tab in very well, but it does hold together, and having all these panels localized to the shins rather than the backpack does mean he's a lot more stable on his feet. You know, what's closest to the ground is the heaviest part of the figure. And it doesn't terribly impact the posing, but the hips on this guy aren't the best feeling in the world, and having shins this heavy mean that he's a little bit unfun to pose. I'll go into it a little more in depth later, but right now, these don't look the best, and they definitely don't feel the best. But yeah. He's very chunky, very kibbly. But aside from that, the sculpt isn't too bad. And the colours? They work. There's a big difference between the colours on this and the colours on the other Wheeljack that I got in 2024. The Gen Selects version was very stark and very vibrant. This figure goes for something a little bit more toned down. You know, the white is the same, it's nice and crisp, thankfully. But the grey has a slightly bluish tint, which is a lot easier on the eyes. And I like how the torso block has a big strip of grey down it. It helps to separate the figure a little bit more, makes it a little nicer to look at. I think the greenish tint for the clear plastic works alright. I would have preferred something a bit bluer, but I'm not mad about it. And the paintwork, that's probably what shines the best on this figure. It's a lot more present in the alt mode, but on the robot mode, everything you see is really, really good. The chest is absolutely flawlessly painted with the green, white, and red. The shades are really nice and vibrant, and the white is color matched pretty much perfectly. And I like how that whole area is a lot more condensed than it was in the Earthrise or Gen Selects versions. And then you get to the head, and while I do like my matte paints, these metallics are really doing it for me. The bluish grey paired with the dark gunmetal is so perfectly him, and while they are recessed in a little far, those blue blue eyes are really vibrant. And while there isn't a whole lot of color on this mode, and I would have appreciated a little on the shins, what is there is absolutely spot on. Now, accessories wise, you get quite a few with this figure. You get his gun, which is admittedly a little undersized, and it's unfortunately cast in clear plastic, which has not been painted with enough coats, so you can see straight through it pretty much. Light really likes to pass through this thing, and where you can put it in his hand, it just looks way undersized. It's much better if you plug it into the port on his shoulder. That does look absolutely perfect. You also get these two gear looking things. These are a lot more relevant in the vehicle mode, but you can use them in a couple ways in robot mode. You can plug one of them onto the barrel of the gun to make it look weird, and you can also store them in these two nubs on the backpack. And finally, you get the shield for the vehicle mode. You can very carefully disassemble it like this as to not damage the clear plastic and put it back together as a road. I don't know why. If you want to do anything with it in the robot mode, then just plug it into these two tabs on the back. It doesn't look great, but it's storage. I personally tend to leave this off, although more accurately, I display this guy in vehicle mode, so I have it on, at least when it's on the shelf. But in the robot mode, off to the accessory tub it goes. Now, articulation-wise, despite all the kibble, this guy's actually pretty good. The head is on a ridiculously unlimited ball joint. This guy can look all over the place. I love it. The arms can move out standardly and can go all the way up, but they can't really go backwards because of the backpack. He has bicep swivels, standard elbows, which are a little high up, wrist swivels, a waist swivel, which is way too loose. The hips can't move out that far, which is a shame, but they can go forward and back pretty standardly. He's got thigh swivels, surprisingly deep knees. The ankles are on a strut that's on a hinge so they can move forward and back a little bit, and then the ankles are on a ball joint that gives you a bit of rotation, a bit more bend up and down, and a really solid pivot. Like I say, despite the big backpack, the articulation on this guy is really good. The joints are all mostly good apart from some clashiness in the shoulders. He doesn't really have any specialty joints apart from the feet, and all the joints feel mostly satisfying apart from those hips and that waist swivel. Now, don't get me wrong, they can hold the figure up, he can still hold poses, but they're too loose to be satisfying. I had a look at this guy at one point to see if I could tighten a couple of screws to make him feel a little bit better, but unfortunately these are pinned in, so it's either kikis or nothing. It's a shame. I've said before that the hips and waist swivel are one of the most important joints to get right feel-wise. It's the figure's core, and if it's not quite nailed, then it can be very underwhelming. I do hope this isn't too widespread an issue, but if it is on your copy, then please leave it down in the comments below. That would be a real shame. The transformation on this figure goes a little bit nuts. It's really well engineered for the front half. I like the way that the arms rotate around a couple of times before clasping together. You do lack a little bit of clearance for some of the center parts, but it's alright. I do recommend that you fold the top out of the way so you can get to everything a little bit more easily. But then the back half is a little bit of a mess of lining up panels that are on joints that are all slightly too loose. Don't get me wrong, it's all intuitive, nothing's confusing to get into the right place. I do find plugging the chest piece into the feet is a good starting point so you got everything lined up a little bit better, but I wish all of the side and back panels tabbed together rather than just locking into the top. It makes it a little bit of a pain. But in the end, I do really like this vehicle mode. Now, it's not a completely perfect mode. I will go over everything that I take issue with quickly. You get some gaps in the front because it doesn't all tab together too securely. There's a couple of big ugly hinges on the sides. A lot of the underside support is coming from two clear pieces, which I really hope are durable. And the amount of panels that made up the back cause it to be a little bit of a mess. But other than that, I really like this mode. There's a lot more crisp detail on the side panels and the spoiler than there was before. That ring of green and the windows around the sides and the top is really nice. The front of the vehicle is a really cool design. I like that big grey block sitting at an angle. I like the window there. That little circuit boardish looking panel looks absolutely superb. A lot of the details here just mesh really well for me. And there's a lot of very good synergy brought together by that strip of grey at the bottom, but I do find that it looks a little bit gormless from some angles. In the G1 cartoon, that front window curves around the edges. I feel like that would have worked as a slightly better look here, but I feel that that wasn't done because of structural reasons, and it does look a little bit thin overall, but thankfully you can negate that a little bit by bringing in that big transparent blue piece and clipping over the top like this, sticking those accessories on the front as the little fire cutters, and this shielded mode looks absolutely superb, and this is how I choose to display the figure. I love the look of this. It's really cool. I don't know if it's just that you can see the details behind the clear plastic or the dark color or the way that it bulks out the mode a little bit more, but this is my favorite way to display this guy. But if you're not a massive fan of the way this looks and you want to make use of this accessory, then you can put it into that road mode again and stick him on top of it. I don't see the point at all. Just Why? And if you want to store the other accessories, then you can just open up the top and plug them in there. Same nubs as before for the gear things, little 5mm port for the gun. Simple. Overall, Origins Wheeljack is a really good figure. It's a lot of fun in everything that it does. I do wish my copy was a little bit more solid, but that's not a deal breaker in this case. You know, this isn't going to be my definitive Wheeljack, but I do like it as a novelty. And for the Voyager price, it's not terrible, but I think the price that it's sitting at the moment on discounts, just about halfway between Deluxe and Voyager, that's about perfect for this guy. And if you agree that this is a good figure, then leave a like. If you don't think this is worth that Voyager price, then drop us a comment and explain why. And subscribe for when my Origins Bumblebee eventually arrives, if UK distribution doesn't just, like, kill me. That'd suck, wouldn't it?